Have you ever met someone so ordinary, so quiet, that you almost overlooked them, only to realize later that they were the very reason your life changed forever? In a small American town, a boy sat at the back of his classroom every single day, invisible to the world. No friends, no confidence, no dreams. Life had already convinced him that he would never matter. But then, one teacher noticed him. One simple act of kindness sparked the fire that would change not just his life, but countless others. This is the story of a silent hero, a teacher whose compassion transformed the forgotten boy into a man who would inspire the world. Stay with me until the very end, because this story could change the way you see yourself and the power you hold to change someone's life forever. What happens to a child who grows up feeling invisible? For 12-year-old Ethan Carter, life felt like a long hallway with doors that never opened. His father had left when he was just 6, and his mother worked double shifts at the diner to keep food on the table. Most days, she came home too exhausted to ask about homework, let alone dreams. At school, Ethan kept his head down, avoiding attention, hoping no one noticed his worn-out sneakers or the bruises on his confidence. His teachers taught lessons, but no one really taught him. He was just another name on the attendance sheet. The other kids didn't bully him outright. They didn't have to. Ignoring him was worse. Ethan began to believe he truly didn't matter. He sat in the last row, sketching superheroes in the margins of his notebook, building imaginary worlds where he could escape from his own. But life has a strange way of placing heroes where they're least expected. On a rainy Monday morning, a new teacher walked into Ethan's 7th grade classroom, a man with kind eyes and a quiet strength. His name was Mr. Reynolds, and unlike anyone before him, he paused when his eyes landed on Ethan. In that brief moment, Ethan felt seen. And that single glance would soon change everything. Why did Mr. Reynolds notice Ethan when no one else ever had? It wasn't because Ethan raised his hand or caused trouble. He didn't either. It was something subtler. Something most people overlooked. The way Ethan avoided eye contact. The way his shoulders curved inward as if he were trying to disappear. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Mr. Reynolds had been a teacher for over 20 years, and he'd learned to see the stories kids carried in their silences. That morning, as rain streaked the classroom windows, Mr. Reynolds introduced himself with warmth that filled the room. His voice was calm, yet carried authority, and every student instinctively leaned in to listen. He taught the first lesson like a storyteller, weaving history into a living, breathing narrative. But between glances at the board and the students, his gaze kept returning to Ethan, who sat hunched over his notebook, drawing in the corner. After class, while other students rushed out, Mr. Reynolds approached Ethan's desk. "You draw?" he asked gently. Ethan froze, unsure how to respond. No teacher had ever taken an interest in his sketches before. He hesitantly flipped his notebook closed. Mr. Reynolds smiled. "I'd love to see them sometime." For the first time in years, someone had spoken to Ethan without pity or judgment. And though he said nothing in response, his heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and hope. What Ethan didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a connection that would rewrite his entire story. How much difference can a single conversation make in a child's life? For Ethan, that brief exchange with Mr. Reynolds echoed in his mind for days. No teacher had ever bothered to notice him, let alone compliment his drawings. He carried that moment like a fragile treasure, replaying it as he sat alone at lunch or walked home under the dim glow of streetlights. Mr. Reynolds, on the other hand, couldn't shake the image of the boy with tired eyes and extraordinary sketches. He saw something in Ethan, potential, depth, and pain, and he knew he couldn't let this child slip through the cracks. Over the next few weeks, he began making subtle efforts to reach him. A smile here, a question there, a soft word of encouragement. Ethan never said much, but Mr. Reynolds noticed the slightest change in his posture, like a flower turning towards sunlight. One afternoon, Mr. Reynolds surprised Ethan by holding up one of his forgotten sketches to the class. "Look at this," he said with genuine admiration. "There's a real artist among us." Ethan froze, cheeks flushing as whispers rippled across the room. For a boy who had lived in the shadows, this sudden recognition felt like stepping into the spotlight. But with attention came discomfort. Not all of his classmates celebrated him. By the end of the day, Ethan found a cruel note stuffed in his locker, mocking his art. That night, he lay in bed, torn between wanting to disappear and wanting to prove them wrong. And that inner battle would shape his next choice, a choice that could define his future.
What happens when the first spark of hope meets the cold wind of doubt? Ethan carried that cruel note in his pocket for days, its words replaying louder than Mr. Reynolds' praise. The teasing from a few classmates made him retreat further into himself. Yet deep inside, something about Mr. Reynolds' belief refused to fade. For the first time, someone had seen him not as a quiet kid in the back, but as someone with real talent. One Friday afternoon, as the final bell rang, Ethan hesitated before leaving. He gathered the courage to approach Mr. Reynolds' desk, clutching his sketchbook tightly. Would you really like to see them?" he asked softly. Mr. Reynolds looked up, surprised, but smiling warmly. "Of course, Ethan. I'd be honored." Ethan slowly flipped through the worn pages, each drawing telling a silent story of loneliness, dreams, and an escape into a world of heroes. Mr. Reynolds studied them with genuine admiration. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady, "you have a gift, and the world needs to see it." No one had ever spoken to him like that. For the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of pride battling against years of insecurity. But with that pride came a dangerous thought. What if Mr. Reynolds was wrong? What if the world laughed at him again? That night, Ethan sat by his window, staring out at the rain, torn between fear and possibility. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment his life would begin to change forever. What if one person's belief in you was stronger than all your doubts? Over the next few weeks, Mr. Reynolds made it his mission to nurture Ethan's talent. He began giving him small art challenges, encouraging him to draw scenes from literature and history lessons. For the first time, Ethan's grades started improving, not because someone forced them, but because he felt motivated to prove Mr. Reynolds right. One day after class, Mr. Reynolds invited Ethan to enter the school's annual art competition. Ethan froze, his palms sweating. "Me? No one would. I'm not good enough." Mr. Reynolds crouched down so he was eye level with Ethan. "Ethan, greatness doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being brave enough to try." Those words settled deep in his heart, though fear still clung tightly. Ethan went home that night and stayed up until midnight sketching under the dim light of his bedside lamp. Every line felt like a battle against his insecurities, against the voices of those who doubted him. Slowly, a masterpiece began to take shape. A powerful drawing of a lone boy standing at the edge of a storm, facing the wind. As the competition day approached, Ethan's anxiety grew. He imagined students laughing, judges dismissing him, and his hard work being nothing more than a joke. Yet, there was one thing stronger than his fear: Mr. Reynolds' unwavering belief. When the day came to submit his art, Ethan stood outside the office door, trembling, his drawing clutched in his hands. Would he step forward or turn back? What gives a child the courage to take the first terrifying step? Ethan stood frozen outside the submission office, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. His drawing felt heavier than paper. It carried every ounce of fear, hope, and longing he buried for years. He almost turned around, almost stuffed the artwork back into his bag and pretended this moment never happened. But then, He remembered Mr. Reynolds' words. Greatness doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being brave enough to try. With trembling hands, Ethan slipped his drawing into the submission box. No one clapped, no one noticed, but for Ethan, it felt like climbing a mountain. That night, he told his mom about the competition for the first time. She was exhausted from work, but when she saw his art, tears filled her eyes. "Ethan, this is beautiful," she whispered, pulling him into a rare hug. That single moment of warmth lit a fire in his heart. The days leading up to the competition were torture. Ethan walked through school hallways filled with laughter and chatter, feeling like every glance was judgment. But Mr. Reynolds kept encouraging him, slipping him notes with small messages. "Keep going. Your art matters. Believe in yourself." When competition day arrived, Ethan entered the auditorium, overwhelmed by the sight of colorful paintings and confident artists. For a boy who had always felt invisible, this was a battlefield. His drawing rested on the display table, simple yet powerful, a reflection of his soul. As the judges walked toward his piece, Ethan's breath caught. Would they see what Mr. Reynolds saw, or would they see nothing at all? What happens in the moment right before your life changes forever? Ethan stood stiffly near his artwork, clutching his notebook like a shield. The judges moved slowly from piece to piece, whispering to each other, nodding at certain paintings, tilting their heads at others. When they finally stopped in front of Ethan's drawing, his stomach knotted. One of the judges, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned closer, tracing every detail with her gaze. She didn't speak immediately, which made Ethan's heart race faster. Finally, she turned to the others and murmured something he couldn't hear. They all stepped closer, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. Ethan felt his face grow hot, unsure if this was real. When the results were announced later that afternoon, Ethan braced himself for disappointment. Third place was called, then second. Finally, the principal's voice rang through the auditorium. First place, Ethan Carter. For a second, he thought he'd misheard. The crowd clapped, some students even cheering, but all he could hear was his own heartbeat. He walked on shaky legs to the stage, accepting his ribbon and certificate with wide, unbelieving eyes. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. Mr. Reynolds watched from the back of the room, pride glowing in his eyes, and gave him a subtle thumbs up. But as Ethan left the stage, a few familiar voices whispered insults, mocking his win. The applause faded, replaced by a sharp reminder. Success didn't erase cruelty. And that night, Ethan would have to decide if he would let the bitterness of others dim his light or fuel it. Can one victory truly silence the voices of doubt? For Ethan, the applause from the competition lingered in his memory, but so did the whispers. He walked through school the next day, clutching his award ribbon in his backpack, unsure if he should be proud or ashamed. A part of him wanted to hide it, afraid that the teasing would get worse. But Mr. Reynolds wasn't about to let Ethan shrink back into the shadows. After class, he called Ethan over and handed him a folder filled with information about a local youth art program. "They're offering scholarships," he said. "I think you should apply." Ethan blinked, stunned. "Me? I don't think I'm ready." Mr. Reynolds knelt down to meet his eyes. "Ethan, you're more ready than you think. The only person who needs to believe it is you." That night, Ethan stayed awake reading the application details. The program was competitive, full of talented kids from across the state. He felt like an imposter even thinking about it. But deep down, something in him stirred, a quiet voice that whispered he was capable of more. The next week, he worked on a portfolio with Mr. Reynolds' guidance. They stayed after school, sketching, refining, and discussing techniques. With every piece Ethan created, his confidence grew just a little more. When he finally sealed his application envelope and handed it to Mr. Reynolds, his hands trembled. Would this be the start of a future he'd never dared to imagine? or just another door slammed in his face? What does it feel like to wait for news that could change your life? Ethan found out quickly. Each day after school, he checked the mailbox before even stepping inside, his heart racing at the sight of every envelope. But days turned to weeks, and still there was nothing from the art program. His hopes started to dim, replaced by a familiar ache of disappointment. Maybe the whispers were right. Maybe he wasn't good enough. That chilly afternoon, he sat in his room staring at his sketchbook, pencil unmoving. The thought of drawing suddenly felt heavy, like it no longer mattered. That's when Mr. Reynolds called. "Ethan," he said with a calm firmness, "your talent doesn't depend on a letter. Keep creating. Your art is your voice." The words struck deep, pulling him out of his spiral. That night, he picked up his pencil again. A week later, Ethan returned home to find a large envelope on the kitchen table. His mom stood nearby, holding back tears. She said, "It's from the program." Ethan's hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was a letter. "Congratulations. You've been accepted with a full scholarship." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The boy who once believed he was invisible had been chosen, seen, and valued. Mr. Reynolds beamed with pride when Ethan showed him the letter the next morning. But this victory wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a journey filled with even greater challenges and choices that would define who Ethan would become. What does it feel like to wait for news that could change your life? Ethan found out quickly. Each day after school, what happens when a dream finally begins to take shape, but fear whispers louder than ever? Ethan's acceptance into the art program felt surreal, but the excitement was quickly shadowed by anxiety. The program was held in a bustling city 2 hours away, filled with talented kids who had been studying art for years. Ethan, with his secondhand sketchbook and self-taught style, couldn't shake the thought that he didn't belong. On the first day of the program, he stepped into a massive studio filled with easels, paint, and bright natural light streaming through tall windows. Students around him carried expensive supplies and spoke confidently about techniques he'd never even heard of. Ethan felt small again, like the invisible boy he thought he'd left behind. But then he remembered Mr. Reynolds' steady voice. "Your art is your voice. No one else can speak it for you." That mantra echoed in his mind as he unpacked his supplies and began to sketch. Over the weeks, Ethan poured himself into his work. While others relied on polished training, his art came from a place of raw emotion. Every line was a piece of his soul. Slowly, students began gathering around his easel, whispering in awe at his depth and originality. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just fitting in, he was standing out. Yet, with recognition came pressure. A prestigious showcase loomed at the end of the program, where the best pieces would be displayed to professional artists and gallery owners. He knew this was his chance to prove himself, but also a test that could shatter everything he had built. What does it take to create something that truly speaks to the soul? As the showcase deadline approached, Ethan felt the weight of every expectation pressing down on him. Students around him worked tirelessly, producing breathtaking pieces that looked ready for gallery walls. Ethan, however, stared at a blank canvas, paralyzed by doubt. He wanted to create something meaningful, something that told his story, but the fear of failure made his hands tremble. On a frustrating day at the studio, he called Mr. Reynolds. "What if I mess this up? What if I'm not good enough?" Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. On the other end of the line, Mr. Reynolds paused before replying softly. "Ethan, art isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Stop trying to impress them, show them who you are." Those words unlocked something deep within him. That night, Ethan began sketching a piece unlike anything he had ever drawn. A portrait of a small boy sitting alone in a dimly lit classroom, his face hidden in shadow. Behind him stood a teacher with a gentle hand on his shoulder, a symbol of the one person who had changed everything. Ethan worked late into the night, pouring his heart into every detail. His emotions guided his brush, and soon a powerful, haunting image emerged, a story frozen in color and light. When he finally stepped back, he knew this was more than art. It was his truth. But would the judges see its power or dismiss it as just another painting from a boy who didn't belong?
Have you ever stood under a spotlight so bright that it feels like the world is staring straight into your soul? Ethan stood frozen at the center of the stage, the crowd before him fading into a blur of colors. His palms were clammy around the paintbrush, gripping it as if it were a lifeline. He could almost hear his own heartbeat echoing in the silent auditorium. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of his teacher. Her calm, steady smile told him he was exactly where he was meant to be. The silence in the hall was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of whispers from the audience. Ethan drew in a shaky breath and dipped his brush into paint. His hand trembled as it touched the canvas for the first time. But with every stroke, something inside him shifted. Fear loosened its grip, replaced by a strange and steady confidence. The audience leaned forward, mesmerized as his artwork began to take shape. Each color spoke of his struggles. Each line whispered his hidden dreams. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just painting. He was telling his story to the world. As the final stroke landed, time seemed to pause. The room held its breath. Then, like a wave crashing against the shore, applause thundered through the hall. Ethan's legs shook, but his heart beat with pride. This was the moment he had been waiting for all his life. Have you ever felt the world cheering for you, yet deep inside, you're still unsure if you deserve it? Ethan stood frozen as the applause washed over him like a tidal wave. Faces in the crowd blurred, but he could feel every clap, every cheer vibrating through his chest. For a boy who once hid behind shadows, this moment felt almost unreal, like a dream he might wake up from any second. As he stepped off the stage, his teacher was waiting for him. She didn't rush to hug him or shower him with words. Instead, she simply placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You found your voice." Ethan's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. All he could do was nod, blinking back tears he didn't want anyone to see. The competition wasn't over yet, but something in him had already changed. It wasn't about winning anymore. For the first time, he had faced his fear and let the world see who he really was. Backstage, whispers followed him. "That was incredible! Did you see his work?" Voices that once mocked him now carried admiration. But Ethan's heart raced for a different reason. What if this wasn't just a moment? What if it was the beginning of something bigger? And just as the thought crossed his mind, an announcement echoed through the hall. "We will now announce the winners." Ethan's breath caught. Everything was about to change. Again.
Have you ever waited for a moment that could rewrite your entire life in a single breath? Ethan stood backstage, every muscle in his body tense, as the host's voice echoed through the microphone. The crowd had gone silent, their anticipation filling the air like static before a storm. Ethan's hands, still smudged with streaks of paint, trembled against his side. He wasn't sure if it was fear or hope making his heart pound this hard. And the winner of this year's regional art competition is… The pause felt endless. Ethan closed his eyes, not because he didn't want to know, but because the weight of this moment felt too heavy to face head-on. In his mind, he heard his teacher's calm voice. "No matter what happens, this moment doesn't define your worth. You do." The hall erupted with applause. Ethan's eyes flew open, his breath catching as his name rang through the speakers. For a moment, he couldn't move. It felt unreal, as if the world had suddenly turned its gaze toward him,
not with judgment, but with admiration. He walked to the stage on shaky legs, the spotlight bathing him in warmth. The trophy felt cold in his hands, but his heart was burning with something new: belief. Yet even as the cheers roared, Ethan's thoughts wandered. If one moment could change this much, what else could he achieve if he kept going? And with that thought, he stepped down from the stage, unaware that this victory was only the beginning of a much larger journey. Have you ever realized that a single moment can change not just how others see you, but how you see yourself? Ethan sat alone outside the competition hall, the cool night breeze brushing against his face as he stared at the trophy in his hands. Hours ago, this seemed impossible. Him, a boy who once hid in the back of classrooms, now holding proof of his talent. Yet it wasn't the trophy that made his heart swell, it was the journey that brought him here. His teacher walked up quietly and sat beside him. "You know, this isn't about the award, it's about the courage you found tonight. That's what will carry you farther than any medal ever could." Her words sank deep, and for the first time, Ethan truly believed them. He thought of the boy he used to be, the one who doubted himself, who avoided eye contact, who thought he didn't matter. That boy was gone now. In his place was someone stronger, someone ready to face the world. The lights from the auditorium flickered behind him, but Ethan didn't feel small anymore. He felt ready to chase dreams he once thought were too far away. As he stood, his teacher smiled and said, "This is just chapter 1 of your story, Ethan." And in that quiet moment, with the trophy in hand and hope in his heart, he knew she was right. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything.
Ethan's journey wasn't just about a boy discovering his talent. It was about the silent hero who refused to let him fade into the background. Mr. Reynolds, the teacher who saw beyond Ethan's silence, had changed everything. He wasn't the loudest or the most celebrated. He didn't seek recognition. Yet his belief, his quiet guidance, and his relentless encouragement lit a fire that transformed Ethan's entire life. Think about that for a moment. How many Ethans are sitting in classrooms right now, doubting themselves? How many dreams are waiting to be discovered by someone who cares enough to notice? Sometimes, all it takes is one person, one Mr. Reynolds, to change the course of a life forever. Ethan's story reminds us that greatness isn't born overnight. It's built by the small acts of courage and kindness that no one sees. And maybe, just maybe, this story is a reminder that you have the power to change someone's life too. So I'll ask you this: which part of Ethan's journey touched you the most? What lesson did you take from Mr. Reynolds' quiet heroism? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. If this story inspired you, consider supporting the channel using the affiliate links in the description. Your support helps us bring more powerful, life-changing stories to the world. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for growing with us. Your growth is our mission.